Welcome to the Sakara Life podcast. I'm so happy to have you on today.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here.
We like to start every podcast with the same question, which is, what is your mission here on Earth? What are you here to do?
I'm here to raise consciousness.
Yes, I know this about you, even though I didn't know you were going to answer that way. How does food and food quality relate to consciousness?
Um, it relates to our ability to ground consciousness. Um,
Mm,
Consciousness is always there. It's the essence of all it is. The quantum physicists are, coming around to formally agreeing that that is the foundation of reality. That all things are conscious. Every electron, etc., is you know vibrating in the sea of consciousness. But from my perspective, um, it's like different octaves of of vibration, and consciousness is a very high octave, and the physical plane is low. It's not good or bad. It's just like faster, slower. And um, for me, the metaphor is like when from music. I use it. I talk about this. I say, if you were, listening to an elementary school band concert, it's maybe very cute and sweet, but it's dissonant. The second trumpet is
mm,
flat. The third, flute is sharp, and it's not harmonic. It's not resonant. It resonates dissonantly, and so.
yep.
And if you listen to a beautiful a cappella choir sing into, sometimes you'll hear like, even though only four voices are being sung, a fifth note will become manifest, and that's the sort of, it's called harmonics in music. And I think of, the physical form as literally it's a vibrating liquid crystal, and the question is really, are you vibrating more or less coherently? And the more coherently you vibrate, the more you can ground the overtones of consciousness. So my analysis is that the structures of culture that we have, whether it's politics or economics or media or education or medicine or agriculture, are all relatively quite dissonant, um, to a large part because the people who make them up are vibrating dissonantly and can't act from their higher natures. And so rather than fight the political system or fight the environmental battles or fight the, whatever fight you want to fight, our strategy, my vision is, if we create a reality where people's bodies are more coherent, then they will, by the very nature of that, begin to behave more well. And if you get a new body every 6 months from the food you eat or junk you eat, depending on whether it is junk or food you're building your body out of, become more or less coherent. And so if we can just, um, that's what we do with the BFA. That's our mission, is to increase quality in the food supply, because foundationally it's critical to grounding consciousness. So I call this the first half.
I love that explanation.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. And at Sakara, we talk about this idea of, it's so hard to get people out of this place where they don't even know what it feels like to feel good. And they think maybe they feel fine. And so they don't even know what to reach for. But then, a few weeks on the food, and it's like they feel so good that they, on their own, without our assistance, which by the way is the hope, like we want you to be your own best advocate and be able to go out in the world and take care of yourself. They start to make really great choices for themselves without even thinking about it. It doesn't have to be prescriptive.
That's
And that's
the
our
way it
hope for
works.
everyone. And it's exactly what you're talking about. It's resonance. It's like attracting like. It's this idea of like the more you nourish, the more you're going to want to nourish for several reasons. Resonance being one, but also it's like you feel so good, you're not willing to kind of
That is
not feel good again.
resonance. That is, you're resonating at a different vibration. Now you've got a context and a perspective, and so you can experience the variation and say, "Oh, this makes me feel less good. This makes me feel more well." And yeah, no, it's so brilliant. Nature, love, God, universe, science, whatever you want to call it, is so amazing. And
got it figured out. We're really messing it up. So the listeners have, heard your bio, and I would love to hear kind of in your own words, like what you do in the world, especially now that we've heard what your mission is. Like, can you connect the two?
Yeah. Um, well, I'm responsible for this term nutrient density um, being a thing. Created the word um, in 2008 with an understanding that there was variation in nutrient levels in food, and that correlated dramatically as a farmer myself, growing up in an organic farm, et cetera. Um, that correlated with soil health, um, um, plant health, pest and disease resistance, decreased cost of production, um, um, better economic viability, better flavor, better aroma, better shelf life, better human health impact. There was this variation in nutrient levels in food that correlated all these things. And so um, I had gone through my own process of trying to figure out how to make a living farming. And the only way to really do it is by working with nature. And when I figured that out, I started to see results with my background. I said, yeah, I bet other people don't know about this also. And so I started giving workshops, turned into courses, turned into an educational organization. So yeah, I'm right now in the middle of a 7-month global speaking tour. Every month is a different continent, basically. And I keynote conferences. I teach courses. I you know give classes. But we're also doing a lot of research. So I teach people how to work more well with nature as a growing food. What are the principles by which plants evolve to grow and how we work with them. Um, But then B, I've been doing a lot of work in the last 6 or 7 years, 8 years now, I guess, to research, like to document that variation in nutrient levels in food and to build instruments that could be used to test that. So the basic idea is that you could, in the near future, with your phone, open an app, flash a light, take a picture of the 3 different bags of carrots you have to choose from, and as a scientific instrument, that picture is not reading a QR code, it's reading the frequency, what the nutrients are in that carrot. 20 out of 100, 40 out of 100, 80 out of 100 from a nutritional standpoint. And then you can have that as a data point to choose from, whether it's meat or milk or eggs or wheat or cucumbers or potatoes. Everything in chemistry is a vibration in physics. And so we can use spectroscopy to assess the nutrient levels in food. And basically, what that means is you can have an app on your phone that can assess the things you have in front of you, and that comes with flavor. Your kids are likely to eat the carrots that taste good, not likely that the carrots don't taste good. Correlates with your health, correlates with soil health, correlates with not
I
eating.
love this so much
All right.
because it's like it, we talk about this idea of how many choices we make for consumers that they don't even know about in the end, because it's like, we decided we wanted to be organic, and then many times we're sourcing from farms that are above organic standards, but where you can't get all that information to the consumer. And so it'd be so cool if they could get it themselves. But also, I think one of the tragedies of kind of like the health food organic movement is you can't see the difference. And I think that makes it really hard for most consumers to understand the difference between, the conventional kale and the kale from a regenerative or organic farm. And maybe some people can taste the difference, but I'd argue that most consumers, especially when, 70% of their diet might be made up of, processed, sometimes even ultra processed foods, that the palate is not there where it can taste the difference. So I love this idea where you're bringing a new understanding to the importance of what's in your food, not just like what it looks like.
Yes, and I think one of the key points that we've um, pretty much categorically confirmed is that just because it's organic does not mean it's more nutritious. And just because it's
Mm-hmm.
local does not mean it's more nutritious. That there's a massive variation of nutrient levels within organic, a massive variation within local, within conventional, whatever you want to call it. And most everything out there is relatively quite poor. So um,
Yeah.
there's not, I mean, in reality, you got most choices are between 15, 30, and 45 out of 100. That's the range you've got. Getting a 60 or an 80 is almost impossible anywhere ever, organic or otherwise. And so um, the nature of the entire
And is
supply,
that because of soil Or why?
because of how we engage nature, which is not with respect and deep symbiosis. Even if we're certified organic, even if we're regenerative, in most cases, we're still acting from a colonized mindset. And, we're not deeply symbiotically partnering with nature. And that effect is relatively low nutrient levels, etc. So,
Well,
yes,
what does that look like with that symbiotic relationship in terms of agriculture? What does that look like to you?
uh, what do you mean? What does it look like?
So from I think most people's understanding, yes, organic is far from perfect, but it's somewhat better than conventional because they're using fewer pesticides, herbicides, or ones that are at least on their list they cannot use. And then regenerative, hopefully you are at least working in somewhat symbiotic with nature, right? Isn't that the whole point? It's like, regenerative farming meaning it's regenerating itself. So like, is that true?
There's a lot of farmers that are not organic or not regenerative that are working deeply and thoughtfully with nature. There's a lot of
Yep.
farmers that are organic, which use lots of fertilizer, insecticides, um,
Yeah.
etc., that are certified organic, but are not working well with nature. And so, yeah, it's a nuanced thing. I mean, I like to use the metaphor of religion. And I say, you've got Methodists, and there's some Methodists that are really deeply spiritual, honorable people, and some Methodists that go to church on Sundays but are hypocrites. You've got Presbyterians, and you got Catholics, and you got Muslims, and you got, Buddhists. You got people that are in all of these sort of religions, but that doesn't really necessarily correlate to their level of spiritual coherence. And it's the same way with regenerative and organic and the rest of the stuff. You can't judge the function of a system by this one simple label. And that's the thing is like, being in tune with God isn't different than going through rites of a church.
Right.
um
Passage rights.
what's that?
I hear, yeah, like rite of passages. I hear that, but I also think there has to be like there has to be a way for consumers to begin to understand where they put their dollars might be a little bit better than
I
other
my
places.
parents wrote some of the first organic standards in the US in the 80s. They ran an organic farming organization for 30 years. I'm 40 years deep into this movement, and I'm saying, as somebody who grew up in the church of organic, knowing that we were better, that after I've done some deep and thoughtful research, 10,000 samples of crops from 5 years from multiple continents, multiple countries, what we find is that most organic is relatively not that impressive. And almost everything that's out there is relatively not that impressive. But there are people doing a good job, and it can easily be done. And the idea is if we can give people the ability to test directly, then they can begin to have that be a pull through that can incentivize as a whole supply chain to focus on quality as opposed to volume, which is currently how the market works.
So maybe help us understand what is nutrient density. Like what when you yeah, like when you talk about it, what is it? And can you explain a little bit more about, how you would think about measuring it? I love this idea of just everything has a frequency, so measure the frequency. But like how are you measuring nutrient frequencies?
So two questions there. What is nutrient density and how do we measure it? The first thing I'll say is um, people have had the experience of eating a tomato in the middle of summer off the vine and having it be a wonderful experience. You've also had the experience of eating a tomato off the grocery store shelf in the middle of the winter. And as an animal, there's a dramatic difference in your experience of those two tomatoes. According to the US government and most national governments, those two tomatoes are nutritionally exactly uniform. Um, in actual fact, they are not. And depending on which nutrient you're looking at, whether it's phosphorus or potassium or polyphenols or antioxidants, the variation could be 5x or 10x or 20x. So, like, this tomato has 20 times as many antioxidants as that tomato, or 40 times as many polyphenols, or 8 times as much, you know, zinc or whatever. And so, what we're doing with nutrient density, the vision is that we're able to do enough science to be able to say these levels and ratios of these nutrients correlate with what we experience as animals as better flavor and aroma, better comprehensive health benefit, better ecosystem function, better pest and disease resistance, et cetera, et cetera. So we have the experience as farmers of saying, look, when your plants are healthy, all these things happen. The pests and diseases go away, the flavor is better, the plants are more vigorous, the soil health effects are better. And when your plants are less healthy, the opposite happens. And we have enough capacity with science now to be able to actually dial in some numbers on what that looks like, what those ratios and ranges are. So we can, from a scientific standpoint, say, this level of polyphenols, this level of zinc, this level of vitamin B12 equals 20 out of 100. This equals 40 out of 100, equals 80 out of 100. That research is very complicated and very expensive. And we're looking at microbiome, we're doing human health trials, we're looking at management, we're looking at variety, we're looking at soil type, we're looking at certification label, we're looking at all these different dynamics to attempt to come up with this basic empirical definition. And that's a very expensive, very time-consuming, total pain in the butt project that we're proposing to go through before we actually ever say, this is the definition of 20, 40, 60, 80 out of 100. So we're actively in that process of trying to tease that out. And instead of having a binary, organic, not organic, local, not local, regenerative, not regenerative, black and white standard, which doesn't really correlate with soil health or nutrient levels, we're saying, I'm a Christian, you're a Protestant, you're a Buddhist. Okay, well, I'm a Christian, I go to church. That doesn't mean I'm actually more spiritual. It just means I check the box of going to church on Sunday. So that's the idea.
Right. At the end of the day, you want the most nutrients. And that's what we're trying to solve for versus what might have been the kind of plight of organic farming or regenerative farming. This is like a mechanism to measure, regardless of your certification. You can actually just see if this fruit or vegetable contains more nutrients.
Right. And in actual fact, a lot of the way organic is raised, et cetera, is not entirely in harmony with nature. It's a lot of the same
absolutely.
Tillage and monoculture and fertilizer and sprays. It's just not using synthetic materials. And so, great, we're not using synthetic chemicals. 100% great. 100% great. That does not mean you have more nutrition, however. It just means you have less toxins.
You have fewer bad things.
Less good, more nutrients, better,
and we should be able to have both. And so do you believe that we can feed the world with more nutrient-rich food, that it's scalable? Because this is what I hear all the time, people who are naysayers.
From ignorant.
Yes, so ignorant. Yes, who say we can't feed the world on organic farms. And that's even their standard, which I know your standard is much more than this. But so you believe, after all your research and your 40 years doing this, that we can feed the world
much more much more inexpensively, much easier. We won't have the negative impacts of agriculture. We'll actually be able to heal the planet. We can turn the brown, massive quantities of the planet green again. We can reverse chronic disease. We suck the life force out of agribusiness and pharmaceutical industry. We facilitate, land tenure. We don't have migration based on climate, extremes. We can powerfully, categorically heal, culture and humanity and the planet simply by working more well with nature, by being respectful and in service to, as opposed to controlling and trying to dominate nature. It's quite simple.
And this is also so connected to your mission, where I think it's hard to raise your own consciousness when you are part of a system that is pillaging the earth.
Exactly. And we've all been raised in this colonized mindset. And even if we're organic farmers, we're still unconsciously behaving in a way that's not as honorable as it could be. And we're all struggling to do more well. But, we're all in this.
And, I read, a study, I think it was out of University of Texas in Austin, that looked at agricultural data collected over 30, 40 years and found that there were so many different types of plants that had lost up to 40% of their nutrient value. And how do people right now, let's say we don't have your app yet, how do we think about going for nutrient dense food? Where, does it mean you go to the farmer's market more? Does it mean like what are consumers supposed to do right now?
The first thing they're supposed to do is exactly what you're doing, which solves 90% of the problem, which is eat whole, real food. Don't eat
Yeah.
junk. That's 90% of the problem right there. And that's massive. That is the foundation.
People don't like that answer, Dan.
Well,
I give that answer
sorry.
all the time. And they don't
Sorry.
like it because it's too simple.
It's either
too
junk
simple.
or it's food. It's not complicated.
Yeah.
If your grandmother
Yeah.
wouldn't recognize it, like Apollon said, it's not food. Period. End of conversation. Junk food is like night, day, love, hate, wet, dry. You can't. It's not junk and food. There's junk over here and food over here. You can't say it's either junk or it's food. Guys, deal with this.
Yeah.
That's foundational.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
that covered.
The 10% is like that 10% delta is like the cherry on top that you're trying to solve for.
Well, that's like, okay, now we can reverse our epigenetic decline.
Yeah.
The first thing is to stop the decline and begin the foundational, get the foundations for the rebuild.
Can you talk more about the epigenic decline and like how, because I think we can sit here and talk about nutrient density and people might have a sense of what that means for their own health, but what does nutrient density mean for like our biological health, epigenetics, nutrigenomics, et cetera? I think just to clarify, I think when people see an orange, it's exactly what you said. It doesn't, like they just assume they're all the same.
And relatively considering, they are mostly crap, is the reality in relation to what they could be, which is a hell of a lot better than orange flavored Kool-Aid. So let's get context, and that junk is junk. Eat food. Let's start there. But then the question is, how do you source good food, and how do you discern and measure? Obviously, we are evolved with the most sophisticated nutrient monitoring systems that can ever be expected to exist. And those are called our noses and tongues. And so when you taste this orange and that orange, this carrot and that carrot, you smell this melon and that melon, like those are very visceral and totally true ways of discerning. And if most carrots don't taste that good, most carrots aren't that good. Most kale doesn't taste that good. Most kale's not that good. That's probably true. There is a little simple thing called a refractometer, which costs $20 if you buy it, online, which you can, if you are willing to go through the work of getting a chunk of that kale and squishing it and getting a drop of juice out, you can put it on the refractometer and you can get a number. And that's a great way of actually measuring. And so
that's cool.
It's like 190 years old.
And what is it measuring?
It's called BRICS, which is total dissolved solids. It's basically this the amount of stuff in the thing. It's like, is it more watery or has more nutrients? It's like, it's really, really simple. It's called a refractometer. I go into all the stuff in all my courses and things like that, but it's, so that would be one way. And, we've got that on our website, for people who want to join, they can get a BRICS kit, and, there's a whole campaign where you can test and you can share. And so there's lots of ways we can actually begin to citizen science bottom up this thing right now. But we're also working rapidly on the meters. It's a whole thing.
Can you help people understand, you talked about epigenetic decline. What does that mean, and why does nutrient density matter for that?
So basically, you quoted the thing like from 40 years ago or 50 years ago, we have 40% less of this. And that's all about averages. So like the USDA average for calcium in cucumbers used to be X and now it's Y. The first thing to say is there is no average cucumber. There's a whole massive spectrum of variation in cucumbers. And so what we can say is, yes, based on what the average was that they got in grocery stores 60 years ago, which was 10 samples, and looked at only a few nutrients, yes, the average has declined. But, and part of what that means is that our bodies have not been getting as much as they used to get. Really, the more, when chemicals came in after World War II, when they started using fertilizer and insecticides and fungicides, it dramatically destroyed soil life. And soil life is foundational for nutrients to be in plants. So you can jack a plant up on steroids, on HGH, whatever you want to call it, and get them to grow big, but they're empty. And so we've been building our bodies out of empty calories. Like, you have the calories, but you don't have all the other critical nutrients our bodies need to function. And so when your grandmother doesn't get enough, and she has your mother, and your mother's not quite as resilient and strong as her mother was, and then your mother doesn't eat well pretty much at all, and then you're born. What that means basically is we begin to fall apart. We degenerate. We get the genetic, markers, problem defects, breaks, which have to do with nutrient deficiencies. Basically, you get a new body every 6 months based out of the food you eat. You need a massive spectrum of nutrients for your body to function well. That's why you've got a nose and tongue to tell you what to eat and what not to eat. If it doesn't taste good, you shouldn't be eating it. Naturally tastes good. And if you do that for long enough, your body begins to not have what it needs to function well. And that's where we're at 3-4 generations into what quote unquote conventional ag, which is really just a historical massive anomaly because humans have been making food for tens of thousands of years. And what we're doing for the last 80 years is completely not conventional.
Not
It's
it.
not conventional. We call it
Yeah.
conventional. It is completely anomalous.
Right.
It is like a perversion of agriculture. We can call it perverted agriculture if you want to call it. Don't call it conventional. Conventional makes it sound like it's like,
It,
like the thing that should be done and is right. And
the norm.
well,
It's
it
the
may be the
norm.
norm, but
Yeah.
it's Anyway, we got to call it something different. Like junk in
There's
food. Start calling it junk. Call it perverse. I don't know.
right.
I'm just
Oh,
saying. Yeah.
totally. And it's the same as like you get to call a cucumber from a conventional farm a cucumber, but you have to call a cucumber on an organic farm organic. It's like, yeah, it's all messed up instead of just a cleaner
And
cucumber, which
but the basic point is
it
that
actually
we
is.
have been
Yeah.
falling apart. And you get a new
Yeah.
body every 6 months. Your blood takes 2 weeks to replace itself. Your bones take 7 years, but average it out. You get 4 billion new cells every day. Your body is constantly rebuilding itself. And so if you begin to build your body out of, eat only food with a high nutritional caliber, your body will begin to heal itself. Like let food be
Yeah.
thy
And then
medicine. Who was it? Hippocrates? First do no
Hippocrates.
harm,
Yeah.
then let food be thy medicine. First do no harm, no screwing around with all the cuts and surgeries and blah blah blah. Like don't do any of that stuff. First do no harm, then let food be thy medicine. And finally, don't prescribe any
Yeah.
poisons. I think that was the full Hippocratic oath. And poisons we could consider things like pharmaceuticals, et cetera, radiation. I don't know. Nature's got it. If
Yeah.
we work with nature, I mean, we either renature or denature. We are relatively denatured. If you go out of harmony with nature, you die. Right? That's what happens. That's what happens. Nature is in charge. We have to understand that nature's in charge. This is the reality we're living in.
Yeah. I think most people think we can outsmart nature.
Good luck.
And like, yeah. And that scale actually requires that we outsmart nature. But so what does kind of scalable farming, like agriculture, look like in harmony? Like, what are some of like the big differences between something like, a typical farm today and a farm that you have in mind that gets to feed the world?
What's really exciting is because things are so bad right now, you can still operate within the current structure and do a few things just a little bit differently. Like you can even use the same budget per acre, like the same $100 per acre, 150 an acre that farmers are currently spending, and just stop spending it on the chemicals and toxins and start spending it on the basic things nature needs. Do less tillage, less machine work, and you can still grow your monoculture wheat at 2,000 acre farms and have like 2 or 4 times higher nutrient levels. There's like perfection, and then there's twice as good as we are now. It's so bad right now that like there's a lot of space between twice as good and perfection. So it's not like we have to completely change anything. It's just like it's little tweaks. It's really just it's about understanding how nature works and making our decisions based on supporting that as opposed to this chemistry set control paradigm. It's so easy. It's really so easy to understand. And that's just the beginning, right? We can go to grand vision, but like, yeah.
And it's so crazy how much we overcomplicate it, because as we start to create these systems, there's always, you're out of this like closed loop system. So then you have excess. And then you have to figure out what to do with the excess. So then you've created a whole nother problem that's going to have a new kind of excess. So like, it's so crazy. So I live in the jungle now, and we compost because like there's not real trash pickup here. It's not really reliable. And it really, I love it because it made us take a hard look at like our trash, which most people, especially in America, do not have to look at. You literally just put it somewhere, somebody takes it away, and you never have to think about it again until you decide to go on a vacation to Bali, and then all the plastic's right in front of you. And so here it's like we compost everything. And also here we have a ton of produce because it just grows like so fast. Like you plant something and then within a couple months you have a papaya. It's crazy. So we have a lot of compost. And then you start to realize like once you take food out of your garbage, you have a fraction of what you used to have in your garbage. And I know food is also really contributing to a lot of the greenhouse gases and global warming because it just kind of, ferments in the landfills. So it's like I totally hear you. The more it's not that hard. Like we make it so much harder. I think it's really hard for people to change their habits and be motivated to do so because they don't think that their small choices are going to have an impact.
And and this is where it comes down to like basic visceral self-interest, which is because you are 3 or 4 generations into bad quality food, like your grandparents started eating it. It's not about the rest of the world. It's about your basic function as a human being now. It's not about like everybody else. It's about you being able to hold it together psychologically, emotionally, physiologically. Your kids, maybe if you got kids and you're worried about they got things going on that kids shouldn't have, you got a partner, like it's basically selfish to feed yourself well because otherwise bad things are going to happen. And by the way, food that's high quality, you know, kills the environment. Like this is the vast majority of carbon that's been added to the atmosphere, by humanity has come from burning soil, not from burning hydrocarbons. It comes from tillage and turning organic matter into carbon dioxide. The vast majority of the carbon that humans have added to the atmosphere comes from that. It not from hydrocarbons. Period. End of conversation. Quite simple. I mean, and it's um, and working with nature, reverses that path, reverses that trajectory, and we can easily, yeah. I mean, we've got all the solutions we need, and actually doing the most selfish thing, which is feeding yourself and your family well, is I think the most powerful economic vector because that's your money right now is going to support this, and you put your money into that. That's your vote. It actually completely begins to build the flywheel of healing. Eating well, feeding yourself well is like the most appropriate thing to do.
Do you live on a farm now?
Absolutely,
Do you grow food
absolutely,
now? You do.
100%.
Do you think, yeah, I
I'm gonna buy
guess it would
trophy.
be weird if you didn't, Dan.
That's why I started being a farmer because I started a family, and it's like there's no possible way. I mean, I grew up on a farm, and I managed my parents' farm in my 20s as my job. But when I, started a family, it was like there's no possible way I could do anything else besides be a farmer because there's no way I can feed my children sufficiently well from buying food. And it's critically important if I'm going to be a father to feed my children well. There's foundational priorities. And I want them not in front of screens and not, and I want them in nature with,
Mhm.
multiple generations with, meals and proper, proper epigenetics. We got to think about the next 7 generations. Like what the children experience with the young powerfully affects everything else. If you're going to have kids, it's responsibility.
To even start to think about, you were talking about epigenetics, it's like even having your hands in the soil so greatly affects which genes are turned on and off. So it's not even just the act. And this is your point where it's like, it's so easy. It's like, if the minute we get back to, taking care of, our home, our water, and our soil, like that's when, and we're feeding ourselves from those places instead of like packaged, cookies and Oreos on the shelf. It's like, it solves so much. And I love what you're saying because I think a lot of times people think, I have to make the right choices because it's the right thing to do for Mother Earth. And I love how you said that. You're like, actually, just worry about your own health. And if you only take your own health and your family's health into account, these are the best things that you can do. And then in the long run, that's what supports like planet Earth, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think that is much more motivating for people because I think people need to see changes for themselves before they can turn like, what they want to do into real action.
And the most important thing is that we're now up against it. You don't really have a choice because
Yeah.
we're all so many decades into the system, we're all beginning to fall apart. And there's no way out. There's no way out except through eating more well. I mean, I would say, if you are willing to envision a simple life, where you have a piece of land that's not too big and a house that's not too big, and you grow a decent amount of your food, your cost of life can go down so far that you don't need to be engaging in the economic system anywhere near as much, right? In many cases, people are so like they're working, 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 and they got the kids are here and they're there, and it's just like you can't like it's because you are living not in relationship to nature that you're in this treadmill to begin with. And so, from my perspective, the end game is everybody's got a couple acres and can live a simple life and doesn't need to work that much for money. And all of a sudden, we have time for culture and community and naps and you know, I don't know, making. I mean, culture.
Sounds so nice. It's really hard to imagine, I think, for most people that that's an option.
Except that was the way humanity did it for thousands and thousands and thousands of years with much less technology than we have now. So if they could do it, why the hell can't we? Indigenous cultures globally worked 2 to 3 hours a day. That's what all the anthropologists tell us. Indigenous cultures globally, 2 to 3 hours a day.
That sounds great. There's plenty of time to nap then.
All kinds of things. Music, dance,
How do,
nutritional proclivities,
right.
whatever.
How do you think people get started? So if somebody's listening to this and, maybe they have an acre or two that has a lawn on it and, or not, or has like for me, I probably have less than an acre here in the jungle, but there's definitely room for maybe some raised like pots, etc. Like where do people start to even learn? Because part of that kind of epigenetic decline is the skill set, right? Like people don't even know where to start
100%.
to grow their own food.
I call it colonization. We've been colonized. We've lost our indigenous traditional, skill sets, and that is a complete travesty. And that's why you need to get your kids out now so they can begin to learn them again. But yeah, I mean that's foundationally. There's an immense amount of knowledge out there. That's what we've been doing with our organization for the last 15 years. Is every workshop, every course, every presenter at every conference is on our YouTube channel for free. um, it's the first thing someone has to do is decide they want to do it. And then they need to take responsibility for their actions, whether it's like, what do you do in the evening? How are you spending your free time? How are you spending your extra money? And start to save up a little. You can buy an acre for like 5, 10 grand a lot of places, right? Like it doesn't actually cost that much. How much are people paying for rent? What's your monthly burn? Is it possible if you got extremely conservative in the next 2 years, you could cut your monthly burn in, by a third? And put that into a pot that could be a couple acres, and you could begin to develop yourself a glide path plan to get the hell out of Dodge. That's what my parents did. When I was born, they lived in inner city Boston. They were community organizers, and they didn't have a lot of money, but they just put aside what they could with a plan, and they bought a piece of land and built a simple house. And you know, I'm the reason. A massive part of why I am who I am is because my parents did that. Um, they just chose to get the hell out of Dodge, and it was called Back to the Land, the Back to the Land movement in the 60s and 70s and 80s. A lot of people did that after COVID. They're like, oh my God, we're totally vulnerable. Let's go out, get a piece of land. And, in most cases, they bought a house that had a massive mortgage and, they're in hock for way too much. But uh, yeah, I mean, we have lived as humans much simpler for a very long time and been just fine. We don't need anywhere near all the stuff we've got, like it's so simple.
I don't have an address here in the jungle, so like we don't get mail. Like we don't. There's no online ordering. There's no
And you're
like. It's the best.
connected. You got all the comforts of civilization. You're leading a
Yeah,
global dynamic, whatever it is, and you're completely like unplugged to a large degree. That is possible. That is possible for people who want to envision it.
yeah.
And you just need to take a decision and start. prioritizing your life force. Because right now, the way it works is it sucked. Your life force has sucked. All the apps and the spending here and the spending there, and you got to make more money and control that. Stop that. You got to take responsibility for your own life. Nothing
Yeah.
else is going to work.
I think I have kind of a random question for you. What are your thoughts on, raising consciousness, getting to a simpler life? How does that overlap with like technology advances like AI? Like, what are your thoughts on things like this? And is there a merger? Is there a reason to have it? Can it help people grow food? Like, what are your thoughts?
Um, we don't
Don't
need it.
care.
It's like, why pay attention to the politics? Why pay attention to, just focus your mind on what we know we can do. Sure, I'm sure there's probably a useful role for AI. I haven't looked into it. I, don't do social media.
Not for your research or anything? You're not using any like AI tools or
I'm
anything for your
sure.
research?
Various people have been telling me recently, Dan, you really got to check this AI thing out. I'm like, maybe. And I don't know. There's so much amazing stuff we've already got. We don't need anything else. We've already got everything we need. Probably yes. I don't know. I just was at Davos at the World Economic Forum speaking at the MIT AI Summit. I should have a comment. I just
Uh-huh.
went and I spoke and I got the hell out of there.
Told them to put their computers
No, I
down
didn't.
and go
I just
toil
told them
the
about the computer and I
soil.
just told them about the research and it was all peaceful and friendly. No, I didn't stop to listen. I was just like, I was not interested. I don't know.
Yeah, I get that. I think there's also something where, moving from the city to a much simpler life here in the jungle, it's like you also realize how little we are not doing something that takes all of our attention. So, you know how studies have shown that like when you're humming, you can't have other
Mm-hmm.
thoughts. Like, you can't multitask basically. But when we're on our phones, like that's all we do is multitask. And I think it's something similar when you're working your land. It's like you're doing that. And so you can have like these meditative thoughts, but you have to
Nature
be
begins to
engaged
communicate.
in activities like that.
The intuitions from
Yeah.
nature come through as opposed to the intuitions from social media or AI. How about you actually go out into nature and experience that reality which indigenous cultures tell us, which is that nature communicates with us and God and your insights, and you get to feel, and you're like, just unplug. Go.
Yeah.
I mean, guys,
Yeah.
nature. It's like,
I'm so with you on this. And it's like getting back to, I mentioned earlier, like people don't like this solution, but I keep coming home to, even though, at this point, my master's in human nutrition, it's like the literature just keeps pointing to getting back to simple whole foods too. It's like I think people think there's like this secret that is hiding somewhere and we have to go find it. Instead, it's like right in front of us, available to all of us. And it's simple and it requires that exactly what you said. It requires that you prioritize
it
it.
takes you making a choice, using your amazing God-given power to create and create a different world for yourself. Just, you've got a conscience, you got your own, it, right? It's constantly coming at you in all kinds of different ways. You know what you're supposed to do. Just do it. Just
It's hard to deny that, Dan. Thank you so much for your time and the work that you do in the world. I'm personally very grateful for it, and I know our listeners are as well. And we'll be sure to mention the resources that you talked about today in the show notes. So if people want to learn more about your work and your teachings, they can check you out there. Thank you for
Thank you
joining
for
us
having me
today.
very much. It's been great fun.